Giacomo Casanova was known as the bad boy of his time. In the 12th century, he went to college at an early age, at the age of 12. Soon after he graduated college, he decided to become an adventurer. He traveled the world and he specifically was known for gambling, being a womanizer, and actually escaping prison. So during the time that he was being an adventurer, he used Venetian masks to disguise himself so that people wouldn't recognize him. He would use this time to go and, like I said, gamble. He would also use the time to be a womanizer. Eventually, the city caught up to him and they did imprison him. However, he escaped rather quickly. In the history of Venetian Masks 2021, they talk about how these Venetian masks were kind of a representation of the absence of rules. And so my cultural artifact is going to be Venetian masquerade masks. These Venetian masks kind of represent the early beginning of rejection of social stigmas. Um, and my purpose for talking about these masks is to give an educational purpose. The three things that I will be discussing are the time period in which the Venetian masks started, what they represented, and sort of what they represent now and what they did for society now. So my first point is discussing the time period in which they came from. They came from a time period in which Christian Lent was huge. Religion was very strict in the Venetian city, and people were expected to follow the rules, and they were expected to, if Christian Lent was going on, they were expected to follow it. You know, this was a time period in which um, you couldn't really, homosexuality wasn't practiced or it was looked down upon, and if you practiced it, you were imprisoned. And the History and Present of Venice Carnival 2021 talks about how um, this was the masks represented a time to just basically live life to the fullest before Christian Lent happened. And the article states that it was just a time to just, you know, have fun and just really do whatever it is that you wanted right before you had to buckle down and practice your religion. The next thing that I will be talking about is the what they were used for, what these masks were used for. Like I mentioned before, it was a time period in which um, it was very strict. The government was very strict, and people didn't really have a way to talk about their problems without being judged because obviously everybody knew who you were going to be. And so these masks were a way for the people to talk about things that the government, things that they didn't like that the government were doing, or there were also ways to, like Giacomo Casanova, to practice things that they wanted to do. Um, and so most of the time, people use these masks to practice homosexuality, be womanizers, go gambling. You know, if they were associated with uh, mobs, they wore these masks in order for them to not be recognized. The Magic of Venetia, History of Venetian Masks, talks about how the masks were a way to step out of your social norms and that they were pragmatic. Um, uh, in fact, nuns and bishops were even known to wear these masks and practice the stepping out of your social norms. So that was very, very interesting. The last thing that I will be talking about is what they represent, what these masks did for society now. Um, they kind of allowed people to start stepping out of their sort of comfort zones. They saw that, you know, not being able to be seen or not being able to be recognized let them talk about, for example, the government, you know, what they thought that the government was too strict on society and the religion. So they would talk about these things and they would discuss these things and people wouldn't be able to point them out. So it kind of led to how society is now. You know, now we can talk about things that we don't like, as in the government, if we don't like something, we could discuss it without having to be arrested or killed, and this is also in Venice. So, they're also more free to do these things. The Monson May 2021 History of Masquerade talks about how these masks kind of were disguised, and they represented a sort of freedom of speech. They, as I mentioned before, the nuns and bishops were even able to practice, for example, homosexuality, and they were able to practice hedonism, so it was a very huge time, and it represented something huge for the Venetian culture. And so my cultural artifact that I discussed today were the Venetian masquerade masks. They represented the rejection of social stigmas, and my purpose was to discuss these in order to give an educational perspective on how something so small and so really extravagant could also lead to representing the rejection of social stigmas. If you guys are curious to find out more about these masks, you can always go on to the Rick Steves Europe page on YouTube, and he really goes into it and discusses it. And I believe he even talks about Giacomo Casanova and how he started to kind of be the face for these masks and kind of describe how these masks really helped him at least be the bad boy, and people kind of looked down to this guy, and this really young guy, and were like, you know what, if he can do it, I can do it. So yeah, thank you.